All right, I think I got all the stuff figured out, and everybody who's in the waiting room or is pending to come in will come in. Give me a thumbs up if everybody can hear me. Good deal, good deal. All right, I might be a little hoarse today. Had a procedure, so I'm not speaking in my typical John Wayne gravelly romantic voice, but this one will probably have to do. Welcome to Michigan Treatment Free Beekeepers. We're calling it the Learn and Share because I couldn't come up with anything more clever. So that is probably going to have to do as well. Just to go over a couple of things, a couple of announcements before we get into it and start having our discussion with Jerry. I wanted to make a couple of announcements. Go over the purpose of the Michigan Treatment Free Beekeepers Facebook page, which essentially is covered on the page, but for those that maybe haven't had a chance to read it or aren't familiar with it, we basically created the group as a group for treatment-free beekeepers located in Michigan who are interested in the promotion, study, and discussion of treatment-free beekeeping. The group is for treatment-free beekeepers and the philosophy supporting it. We're unconcerned with treatments or the discussion or application thereof, unless it's to discuss the damages caused by these practices. So treating is simply not a discussion topic, at least as far as what you should do to treat or what kind of treatments you should propose. And this is generally within the realm of the Facebook page. So as to keep the topic focused on the principles and philosophies of treatment-free beekeeping so that others can benefit and learn from that particular approach to beekeeping. The group is also to provide valuable treatment-free resources locally. There are other groups of treatment-free beekeepers throughout the United States and other countries, as well as a national group which has a global following with lots of members. I think it's up to like maybe 40,000 plus. That is also a good resource. And if you aren't a member there, you can go ahead and go to that page and apply and join the group. There's lots of good, useful information there with regional information you can always get from other people. We also want to set up a system locally where folks that are in Michigan or close by can have access to treatment-free resources, bees, stock, woodware, NUCS. I mean, things that typically you can find in abundance in our region. However, are all primarily traditional or, as they say, conventional treated type wares and materials. Needless to say, that said, we hope that we can develop some resources that can be shared locally and people can, work together to network to share those resources. We do have some more learning events coming up. One that is currently scheduled is still to be determined for sure as to whether or not that time slot will be the time slot for Saturday, May 15th, but we are pretty much set in stone as far as the speaker on that day. His name is Terry Combs. If you aren't familiar with him, he can be easily Googled. He is an author. He does have a book available on Amazon. It's called The Boy Scout, the Beekeeper, and the Bees. What's interesting about Terry is that he actually has a beekeeping badge from the Boy Scouts, which I don't think they have anymore. And they talked about bringing it back, but it used to be something that Boy Scouts could get, which is pretty interesting that it's gone the way of the dodo. So be sure to keep a lookout for information about that. They'll be posted to the group as soon as the details are all finished being ironed out. And then for June, Dr. John Keefus, he will be joining us for another Learn and Share series. Will be, excuse me, pre-recorded. However, we will be soliciting questions from people who are interested. If you're familiar with Dr. John Keefus, he is definitely a pioneer in the treatment-free beekeeping world. He has lots of good information. He's got great successes. He has very large operations in France. He's native born to Ohio, but thankfully that means he speaks English rather well. So he should be pretty interesting to join in and listen to. So the presenters today will be engaging in peer-to-peer discussion. We'll leave participants muted during the discussion, and most participants will be muted upon entry. You do have access to unmute your microphone if you need to. Not sure that that would be necessary, but if you found it utterly necessary or there was some sort of an emergency, feel free to scream. Questions can be posted in the chat during the presentation. They'll be answered simultaneously by moderators. Certain questions that could be best answered by the presenter, can easily be curated for later if they can't be answered by a moderator. Don't be shy. If you have a question, go ahead and post it up in there. This presentation is being recorded and it will be available later on the Facebook page. So for those of you that weren't able to join us, welcome, and we hope the content's helpful. Jerry Wagner is our featured speaker today, and we have engaged Jerry just because he has some useful information and experience based on his journey that is pretty applicable to a lot of folks that are looking to take the plunge into treatment-free beekeeping. Ironically, there's not a lot of easily accessed information in local beekeeping clubs and regional beekeeping clubs, and usually if the topic of treatment-free beekeeping is broached, you go the way of the dodo, as they say, or you become a pariah, or people will become angry or frustrated that you would even consider such a thing, as is the traditional practices are the most well accepted and foundational approach to beekeeping. But Jerry has a unique story about his foray into the beekeeping world, and he started his first year with 3 colonies. 2 of them were treated and 1 was not. And although he did treat his 2 colonies, they essentially had succumbed and perished. Jerry's anecdotal experience was enough for him to transition to non-chemical beekeeping when he had a single colony survive. Jerry's former fire controlman for the U.S. Navy and served in combat as chaplain for the U.S. Army. He has since retired from the military and resides in Western North Carolina with his wife, Shannon. Now, North Carolina's weather does tend to be a little warmer than Michigan. However, they do have temperature swings significantly similar to Michigan's, at least most of southern Michigan. Middle, northern Michigan and the UP, that's a whole other Arctic climate. So I'm not sure there's too much that compares to that. He's a full-time graduate student in social work, and he studies when he's not in the bee yard. He currently maintains 8 hives, 3 NUCS, and 5 splits. I think that number's changed. Jerry's been doing some finagling with his colonies as of late. He's had up to 28 colonies and as little as 1 some years. Now, he's entering into his 6th season, and he says his goal is 8 to 10 colonies, but I'm willing to bet it'll probably eclipse that if he's successful. So we'll get the technical switch going on here and see if I can do it successfully. And we'll turn the microphone over to Jerry. Jerry, I will make you, let's see, I'll see if I can make you host. We'll just unmute you and see how that goes. We don't got your microphone yet, Jerry. There we go.
Hey guys.
Hi, Jerry. How you doing?
I'm good. I appreciate you guys having me and what you're doing up there in Michigan, and just hope to be an encouragement to you guys, kind of tell you my experience, which may mirror some of yours, or if you're in transitioning, may mirror some of my experience when I started out. So as discussed, I started out with my dad, and the beekeeping for me was my grandfather had been a beekeeper when he was younger, and he was a World War II vet. And I remember being a kid hearing stories about honey and beekeeping and how it was what the family did. And so I always had that memory in my mind. And my father had always wanted to be a beekeeper. So I used to dabble in reclaimed wood and kind of buying and selling wood. And I had this contact. I went to buy some wood from a building that was kind of falling apart from the 30s or 40s. And there was a couple of beehives sitting out in the field. And they looked like they hadn't been tended to for quite a while. So I asked the gentleman if the beehives happened to be for sale. And he said, well, I have a guy that that I pay. Well, he said, I don't pay him. He said, I have a guy that comes out here, but I let him stay on my property. And the deal is he's supposed to give me some honey every year. He said, but I hardly see him out here, and I haven't gotten any honey in the last 2 years, so I'm ready to give him up. So he and I made a deal. I found out later how very fair of a deal it was, and that became my and I's first hive. I opted to split mine into 2, and he split his into 4. His was a double deep. Started beekeeping from there. Those are the 2 hives that I actually, out of the 3 that I had, that I treated the first year for mites. One that I didn't treat, I'll kind of highlight later on. But those 2 hives that I got, unfortunately, on that old rolling pasture in that farm, ended up not making it through my first winter. So beekeeping, part of why it was because my grandfather had been that keeper, and my dad had always wanted to do it. Started with my dad, but I wanted to collect raw honey. I thought, hey, if I can do this and get enough for my family, maybe sell some, I think that would be a lot of fun and exciting for something the family could potentially do together. I was fascinated what I already knew about bees. I didn't know very much at all, but I thought they were a very fascinating insect. So when I got these bees, what motivated me to treat, everywhere I looked was treatment options, and they weren't really suggestions. They were like, this is what you need to do to keep your bees alive. And from starting in the hobby, I just didn't know there was an option if you wanted your bees to live besides treatments. So kind of everywhere I turned within the hobby for advice was kind of a road to treatment, whether I went to different forums and read from prominent beekeepers, from Facebook groups. When you go on typically the mainstream bee Facebook groups, someone says that their hive died last year, and the first question somebody inevitably asks is, when was your last mite check? When was your last mite treatment? Before they even know the rest of the information. So that's what I was exposed to, is, okay, if I want to keep bees alive, I've got to treat for mites. And that's kind of why I did my first year. That first year I decided to treat with, I guess, formic acid is how I treated those 2 out of 3 hives that I had. So that's kind of how it was for me. It was just the forums, the Facebook groups, even local bee club. When I joined local bee club, much of the topic for conversation was mite treatments, mite counts, when to do them, when mites are the worst, and kind of what I was gonna have to do to so part of that, I'm sorry, part of that was the different groups that I went to, the local bee club even, were very, very much focused on that. And even beekeepers I came in contact with initially, kind of every road just kind of led me to treatments, and that's what I did. So when I think about the guidance that I got, kind of led me down that road. But after that, after I lost 2 out of 3 hives, and ironically, the 2 that I lost were the 2 that had been treated, and the one that I didn't lose, I didn't know much about this beekeeper, but I knew that he had good stock, and I knew that he was a reputable breeder, a master beekeeper, well established in the area, very experienced. That's the hive that lived. So my initial thought was, there's something to this. If the ones that I treated didn't make it, and the assumption is if they don't make it because of mites, maybe treatment is not the only option that there is. And that kind of led me to.
Let let me ask a question. With the one that you did not treat, I don't know if you said it or not, maybe I missed it. What was the reason you didn't treat the third colony?
I got it later in the season, and I don't think it was really intentional. I just got I got it late in the season. I thought I was gonna let it be and not stress it out and see how it does.
So it was kind of by happenstance that, you know, that colony went treatment free.
Yes, I believe it was. Thinking back, I may have been out of a Formic Pro or whatever those little patties are called. I may have actually just been out of them at the time. So,
So was the stock that they came from also treated?
sorry?
Was the stock that colony came from also treated with that breeder?
No, he's a treatment-free breeder, and that's what I kind of found out later. So that next spring, kind of part of what led me to this realization when I say, I wonder if people doing this without treatments, and talking to that gentleman who became a mentor for me. That's when he shared that it's like, hey, you know, I don't treat my stock and it works for me. And I said, well, about how many hives do you have? And he said, well, I'd run 2 different yards, but I've got about 400 to 500 hives. And he had been treated free at that time, which was about 5 years ago, for 10 years. So now he's been free for about 15 years. He said, sure, you know, I have some loss, but I just haven't ever traded for mites, and I believe in good stock. And that kind of opened my mind and kind of opened my eyes to the treatment-free world. So now, looking kind of through a different lens, I kind of focused on, let me find people and kind of look for people that are treatment-free. And upon being able to do that, I was able to find contacts. I was able to find some Facebook sites. I was able to find gentleman I said that I kind of used and helped me along as a mentor. He was treatment free. And then I got involved with a Facebook site, kind of much like yours, for state North Carolina. It was a Free Beekeepers of North Carolina site. And it kind of happened at once for me where I felt kind of reassured that, hey, I'm not the only one doing this. There's other people that are doing it. They're successful. It doesn't make me radical or crazy. I'm not the 1%. Trying to think out of the box here. There's a lot more than me. And kind of all this came together, and I just decided, hey, I'm gonna try it, and I'm gonna see how I do with it. The other thing I think motivated me to change was time beekeepers' success stories. When I think about the old time beekeepers that I would talk to and run across or in contact with, a lot of these old time beekeepers that have been keeping for 40, 50 years, they never started treating when Varroa kind of came and that movement kind of came into the United States. They just stayed doing what they were doing. And I talked to several old beekeepers, and they said, you know, I just never did it. I just never treated. And I'd ask them about their loss, and sure, they had tough years and they had good years, but it didn't seem like they had any more loss than a typical any other beekeeper that I had been exposed to. So that was also really encouraging to me. So challenges when I think about the challenges to treatments, I feel like, and I wish I had this data on me, you guys might be more familiar with it than I am, but there has been some studies that say there's similar loss rates among people that use chemicals and use concentrated organic substances versus those who don't. The other thing I would ask when I think about treatments is, does every loss result from mites? It just feels like to me on some of the bigger forums that mites are given maybe more than they're due. I've definitely had loss, but I don't think all my loss has been from mites. I think there's been some other circumstances and some even unexplainable circumstances where somebody with, much more extensive experience than myself would have to be able to kind of diagnose what happened with those hives. The other challenge, I think, to using chemicals is the potential resistance varroa would build up to the chemicals and the substances that were used. I remember in my state, they used to, probably 4 years ago, they were saying, hey, we need to be rotating between different treatment options so that the mites don't become more immune because they're already showing some immunity. So to me, that was, I took in consideration. When I think about treatment versus non-treatment, I think how feral bees seem to be thriving without our help, how a lot of people, whether they treat or untreat, a lot of people would say that strongest bees come from swarms and cutouts. So me, it was thinking about maybe if I treat, I'm allowing genetics that would have died in the wild without my help. So kind of my transition step into this that I did with ordering queens. I needed a couple queens, I think my second year, and the queens did not do bees either. Them lay for just a little while and she was gone. The queen lived for a month and a half and then they superseded her. And I realized now it's kind of getting an inferior quality, just kind of mail order junk, kind of mass produced sugar water, just bees. They were queens, but I don't think they were from a strong stock source. So the first thing I think, looking back, the first thing, maybe it wasn't but it was one of the first steps, is transition away from the where you don't know the history and you don't know how strong the genetics are, kind of getting away from those. The second thing that I recognized in my journey was I don't have to do this turkey. I don't have to say, hey, tomorrow I'm a chemical-free, treatment-free beekeeper. My process was kind of, hey, at first, stop doing mite treatments and I'm going to look for better queens. Then kind of after that, I used to use some honeybee healthy or supplements to sugar water. I used to use pollen patties. I said, hey, I'm going to stop using artificially made pollen patties and kind of let nature determine when the buildup is going to be in spring. I'm not going to put additives in the food. It's something simple I can, do. And I really didn't notice any difference. So it must have been a year or two later, and it was kind of a challenge for me because I used to use a lot of hive beetle traps in hives. It was a standard thing. I heard beekeepers would put one in each side of a box, a food box, in your supers. And so that's kind of what I did, because we have a little bit of a challenge with small hives in North Carolina, depending on where you're at. So I got away from those.
You were kind of following a lot of the similar recommendations that most new beekeepers are getting right out of the box.
Right.
Yeah, going back to what you were mentioning about the concerns you had about losses being related to mites, or how every loss is often assigned as being the responsibility of mites. When you had started thinking along those lines, what are some of the I guess differences that you were coming up with that may have caused the downfall of colonies as you've learned along this path, as you were going along in your beekeeping? Because really the answer for everything on the forums, as you'd mentioned, is, well, did you treat? The first answer to any question, at a beekeeping meeting regarding what may have gone down with your colony or what was happening is, well, did you treat? And typically the assignment of fault is almost always, well, it's got something to do with the mites. Granted, that is primarily one of the most significant issues that bees are facing, if you will, when it comes to collapse or failure. But that's where the treatment aspect kind of comes into play. So, like the question would be is what were some of the things you were starting to suspect might be more of a contribution to the downfall of your colonies as opposed to just not treating, or that it was the varroa mite?
You know, that's a great question. Looking back, and I remember the symptoms of all my losses. Looking back, some of my losses were definitely that I don't think I had strong enough stock to form a healthy sized winter cluster to be able to even withstand our winters. So I think that was part of it. Part of it is, I think my first year or two, I probably didn't have enough I didn't have enough honey left in the hive, or the honey was not accessible to the bees close to where they died, I think, of starvation. I've had a couple, I had a hive last year. It was didn't make it over the winter. It was an extremely strong hive that was a swarm. And those things just sometime in early spring, they absconded. And I don't mean like evidence of mite absconded. I mean, they were just gone. There weren't dead bees in the bottom. There weren't dead bees in the frame. They already made it through the crucible of winter. There weren't dead bees outside the hive. They were just, it was like a ghost town with a super and a half of honey on top. And luckily I caught it before the wax moths or, anything else caught it. But like that, I just can't explain why that is. I've had loss like that. That just seems to be like a pure absconded. They're gone. So, I mean, I definitely have had some that I think back, knowing what I know now, I think back and I was like, that was mites. But I think it was a real blend for me, if that answers your question.
Sure. Well, and it all kind of comes back down to bees. Bees do bee things, and sometimes they're going to do what they do despite our interventions. And sometimes we get caught up in the mix of trying to intervene too much. But, at the end of the day, if mites are the primary problem that most beekeepers are going to be faced with, I think that's where the deciding factors as to what you're going to do is going to play the biggest role in a successful transition into a treatment-free approach to beekeeping. And that leads into the next question I have for you. At what point, because you mentioned the allure of beekeeping for you really ties back to a family kind of thing. Your father, your grandfather played roles in the motivation that you had. And for a lot of us, at least for me, resource availability was kind of a major role player for me. If I could afford to lose some money on hive bodies, and I could afford to lose some money on bees, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I want to be losing money on bees, and that kind of drives the treatment factor for a lot of people. You don't want your bees to die, but treatment-free beekeeping has more to it than just not using chemicals or interventions. It has a lot to do with the mindset that you take going into the actual beekeeping experience. So, at what point did you decide that you were okay with the acceptable losses that you were going to incur, whether it be other things besides mites, or whether it be the fact that mites did take the colony down? Like, how did you come to that space in your, your life with beekeeping, that was okay to lose bees, so long as you continue to take this approach towards stronger stock, better queens that aren't going to be impacted by, let's say, treatments or building resistance in the varroa mite with the treatments? When did you become okay with losing bees?
That's a great question too. I think I'm willing to kind of eat the cost. Sometime in my second to third season, I just kind of, part of it for me was meeting a peer that was about on the same level of beekeeping that I was at the time. And even though we were beginners, we were all in the hobby, and we read a lot. We're on Facebook, read blogs, we're on Facebook groups, and really just were enthralled with bees. And we talked to, a lot of, he has an old time uncle that's been beekeeping for 30, 40 years. I had my mentor that was helping me, that was a master beekeeper for about 40 years. So we just kind of decided, hey, we kind of did it at the same time. When I found him, he's like, I don't treat either. And we were kind of both outcasts of our local club. So kind of in that friendship that we encourage each other, and he was already doing it. And I said, well, you know what? Talking to you has encouraged me, and I'm going to be all into it. And him and I had already discussed this probably almost 4.5 years ago, that, hey, if you lose your bees and I have some left, I'm going to help you get started back. And same deal the other way. So I can still call him. Sometimes I'll have an extra queen, or sometimes him and I are close enough, I have an extra nuke that if I'm not doing anything with it and he wants to grow his hives this year, he's in a growing year. He kind of does growing years, selling honey years, growing years, selling honey years. So if he's in a growing year and he needs a nuke and I don't have room for it, I'll just say, hey, come pick it up, man. So yeah, that's how it looked for me. I think when you mentioned best practices, strong genetics are important. And that's one of the keys for me. But also, I believe in, this is what my buddy and I do. We both believe strongly, and like you'll probably read on a lot of the treatment-free Facebook sites and forums, about adding some genetics from within your greater area that are different but quality treatment-free stock. So him and I, sometimes, I'll swap a nuke of my best for a nuke of his best, or a queen of his best for a queen of my best, or that line. So that's been, I think, a great help to me. Of course, we do splits to create artificial swarms. Some of us create brood breaks and cycle. Brood break cycles by putting the queen in a push cage. I think one of the keys for me, I've highlighted times, was the community of encouragement. When I lose a hive, or when I lose multiple hives over a bad season, back to when I talk to people on the treatment-free Facebook pages, and they've done really well that winter. And that reminds me, hey, it's not because I'm not treating that I didn't do well. Life happens, bee stuff, and I'll get it next year. So I think that community of encouragement is great for me.
So having local support, knowing of resources in your area, being able to, have somebody to fall back on if you needed them, or just even to bounce ideas or notions off of, help provide you with some of the encouragement you needed to kind of struggle through some losses.
Absolutely. And the last thing I think I've done with losses is, when I think about, besides the community encouragement, is the last thing I would say is fighting the urge. And this is the hardest one, still hard. It's hardest for me, I think, personally, to fight the urge to use your strongest hive or two to save your weakest hive or two. And so many successful old-time beekeepers have told me, and they don't use treatments, not because they necessarily have a mindset of being treatment-free, they just never started. But I talked to them, and time again, I would hear these guys say, capitalize best, strongest, most prolific hives. And sometimes they say, not your really good hives, your hives, your fantastic hive. Focus on that bloodline. That's what I do.
So emphasize on that a little bit. Why would you not sacrifice your strongest hive to save one of your weakest hives? What do you stand to gain there? Like, what's the purpose of allowing that colony to kind of, fester on, or even just kind of maybe even eventually perish because it can't make it through the winter?
So more times than experience listening to others kind of in the community that I'm in, being a weak hive that needs help is probably going to need help. And you helping a weak hive with your best hive or your second hive might get that hive to become an average hive, but it's never going to be your best. I had a hive that went through winter. That actually I bought several hives free beekeeper, and it was just getting out of the hobby, and I had a deal I couldn't pass up, and it was one of his hives that I bought. It made it through winter, but it's probably the last week, 5 weeks behind all my other hives. That hive is never going to be one of my best hives. There's a reason why it's 5 weeks behind. And unfortunately, it probably has something to do with the queen and genetics, whether they're not good foragers, whether she kept too big of a population at the beginning or at the end of fall, and they ate through all the stores. I mean, there's probably a reason why. So every time I've tried to help my weakest hive with my strongest hives, my strong hives just become average hives, slightly above average, and my weak hives still never become more than an average hive if they make it. So oftentimes it becomes a continual process of helping hives with hives. And whether you want to proliferate your strongest bloodline or be a great honey producer, when you're giving up your best resources of your strongest hive, it hurts you.
Yeah, and in the beginning, new beekeepers, even maybe a season or two under their belt, don't have a whole lot of resources available to them from within their own yards to really be helping weaker hives. And in some instances, maybe even requeening those colonies might give that colony another chance in order to give that beekeeper the bees they need to continue the transition into treatment-free beekeeping. Have you had success with requeening your colonies in your yard from, good stock that you've developed from the treatment-free colonies that have made it through winter?
That's something that I would say I've been working on. How much success I have, I would have to, I really don't have that great of notes on what I did with bloodline and what year, but yeah, I definitely say there is success. And just one simple way to do this, you have to have more than one hive, but it's not real complicated. One simple way, say you have two hives, and one hive is a stellar hive and one hive is they made it through winter, but they're not doing great hive. And if you notice swarm cells or supersedure cells on that hive, I don't know that I'm trying to give you an instance, but let's say, for whatever reason, let's say that hive gotten to the point where it's big enough to split, your weaker hive. So you go ahead and split that hive, and you split the laying queen out of the hive. That hive makes queen cells. So knowing what I know now, I would let them make those queen cells. Then I would deprive them of those queen cells. Then I would take a frame of eggs and larvae from that super hive that I have, and I would put that one frame, I would just swap it out and put that one frame in there. Now use that second colony to foster and take care of the bloodline that I want to continue in my yard. So yes, you have to have two hives from that, but that's kind of a very efficient cost, method within your own yard, being able to just kind of choose your bloodline.
So that's a purposeful kind of intervention versus a preventative intervention. You're not trying to save a weak hive. You're trying to propagate a strong colony.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So in your beekeeping experience, some of the benefits of treatment-free beekeeping up until this point, what would you say some of those have been, the highlights of those have been for you? So
I would say, I've alleviated concern about potential effects. I say potential because I'm just sure. I'm undecided on how much I trust what the government tells me at this point in life. So not having chemicals to worry about, I don't worry about the effects. I think great sense of pride and accomplishment. I definitely save money on equipment and materials. When I did use even those Formic Pro, I think they were called, patties I put in, I had to dispose of the container properly, and there was waste concerns that I don't have to worry about now. And I think the head of our local North Carolina, what's kind of become not the official state site, but the big Facebook site for our state in North Carolina, Treatment Free Bees. He always, Mark, and he always would talk about when you spend less time treating and less time fixing, and you let bees do what bees are going to do, it reduces stress and makes the hobby more pleasurable. And honestly, that's what I found myself. I found that true for myself. Being less concerned with the small details allows me to join into the hobby more. And then finally, I would add, there's a market. I'm not sure your guys' market, but like in our area, there's a definite niche market for treatment-free hives and treatment-free wax and treatment-free honey, of course. So that allows me, like when I sold 2 NUCS about a week and a half ago, I put them on Facebook Marketplace, and I sold them both in like 2 or 3 hours. So when you put treatment free on there, you still have the interest of people that do treat. And I tell people when they get here, hey, you treat, they haven't been treated. Once again, remember, you're going to want to do so if you're concerned about mite deaths. But I also appeal to that group that is treatment free. I've got the bigger market covered, but I've got the niche market covered as well, if that makes sense. Because some people seek me just because they don't treat.
Well, that's good. You gotta have resources to get them from. I mean, we don't have a whole ton of them in Michigan. There are a few treatment-free beekeepers around. The greater Metro Detroit area is, I don't know, it's infested with bees. I don't know if that's the right way to label it as infested, but there's bees everywhere, and everybody's keeping bees, but they're all treated. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And part of the purpose of the group is to develop that availability for folks that want to, engage in treatment-free beekeeping and have others that they can consult with, or to swap NUCS, or to share queens, or share the best stock with each other. Excuse me. Yeah.
So this is my show and tell. That one, ironically, I know you can't see my beautiful queens in here, but there's in each one. That same stock that I had that first winter that I was talking about that successfully from the breeder that happens to live as the bee flies about 3 miles from my house. 2 queens from him just this afternoon, and his line is the only line that has lineage that's in my apiary right now. So I figured, hey, I'm to the point where I had 2 really sizable hives not successfully queen from a split. I did my split. I usually split queen out, and they didn't queen back. I gave them a frame of brood and eggs, larvae, and they made queen cells right away. So I know they're queenless. So re-queen, but it's worth the money to me to buy 2 more queens of the same stock and keep it going.
Thanks a lot, Jerry. That's a lot of helpful information. Appreciate you sharing, your journey kind of with us. That's not always easy to transition from treatment free, or from treatment to treatment free for folks. And it's a lot easier, I think, to just start treatment free, but not everybody has the benefit of the knowledge they need that's an alternative, or that is even an option. And once you learn about it and you're able to get information about it, you can move forward with confidence because you have others that can support you. When it comes to mentoring, not everybody has access to a treatment-free mentor either, somebody who can help them along in that process. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the people that you're learning from don't have any good bee information, or they're bad beekeepers. There's lots of things you can learn from beekeepers that do treat. Unfortunately, most of it will center around getting back to treatment for mites, because almost everything they do goes full circle to addressing the Varroa issue. Treatment-free beekeeping does address the Varroa issue because it just doesn't have anything to do with managing the Varroa. That is how it's addressed in that regard. Did you have anything further you wanted to add? Any last burning revelations or insights, blazing insights?
No, I hope I've been, if nothing else, just an encouragement to you. And I think what you're doing is great, trying to build a community of support and resources for each other. And, you know, that's, last thing, it's along the lines I've been talking about. Beekeepers, helping other beekeepers, to me, is the key for encouragement and success. I think too often there are some people in the hobby that kind of keep best knowledge and keep best secrets and keep the best tips. And I think, you know, this is mine. I got this. It works. I'm not telling anybody. But I just encourage y'all to share healthy bloodlines, share the best traits, share the best tips, because we can all benefit from each other, and enough nectar and pollen for my hives, your hives in Michigan. We're all really on the same.
Thanks, Jerry. It's been enlightening. I appreciate it so much. For the rest of you, I'm going to go ahead and ask that if you have a question, or if you had some additional questions, either for Jerry or for the participants in the room, there's actually a lot of good knowledge here. You guys could definitely benefit. Excuse me. Becca and Mike have joined us and said that they are interested in transitioning to treatment-free beekeeping. And we're actually getting a couple of NUCS and going to continue trying. I think they said they were going into, is this your third or fourth year? With having some poor success with wintering. Do you guys want to try and see if your microphone will work? Come on, you can join us. Should allow you to unmute it if you want. I'll just unmute everybody. I'll unmute everybody and nobody scream all at once. I think we could remain civil. Jeff, we got you on audio.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. Well, Bruce, it's too loud at Bruce's place, but we can just leave him on the chat. It's better that way anyways.
Something that Jerry said about sharing resources and knowledge, I think is so important, because the psychological aspect of that takes away the fear of losses. Because the next year, if you do lose all your colonies, if you have somebody that can share a colony with you, then it's a real psychological benefit. It takes away that fear. I've never treated from the beginning, so I didn't have that issue. And I have so many colonies right now that it's, you know, if you have a loss, then you just take your best colony and your best couple colonies, and you make them queenless, take those cells, split your hives up, and before you know it, you're back up to where you need to be, or back where you want to be. So I think that's part of the other issue, is if people, they don't know actually the mechanics of expanding their apiary, then that's something that's going to hold them back. So if they can get over the fear of raising more queens and expanding their apiary, then I think that is the other part of it that helps. So if you want only 5 hives, in theory, you need 10, because if only 5 is going to make it, so that means you need to get some more equipment. So I know I don't know if that's an issue for some people or not, financially, to get more equipment, but I think that's kind of an important thing for me, is I've always had plenty of equipment, and in the last few years, I didn't have issues with expansion at all. I mean, once you get over that, learn to do a little bit of expanding, that fear goes away. Now, my biggest concern is just improving my genetic diversity, which means I would like to take my virgins to other people's yards and in the similar area and just see how they do there, mating, bring them back, and then see how they overwinter, see how they build up their stores. So.
Hey, Becca, you got voice now, don't you? Oh, that's all right. So we can just see your mouth moving. So Becca said that this is their 4th calendar year. Their first year, they had 1 nuke, 3 nukes, the 2nd and 3rd, and then they did a split, even split in the last year, but maybe felt like made them too weak. So it sounds like what you're describing, Becca, is that you did start out trying to be treatment free from the beginning. Is that right? Okay. And the biggest barriers it seems that you're experiencing is getting through the winter. Is that right? Okay. And so, excuse me, and that's kind of a bane for our existence. Yeah, so they're not making it through. They don't have something going into the winter that helps them get all the way through, and maybe it is mites, right? So you're going to start your treatment-free adventure again, and you're getting some overwintered stock. And this overwintered stock has overwintered queens. Becca's typing, everybody. She's writing a thesis for us. Okay, so what Bruce was brought up is a good point is, the size of your colonies, going into winter kind of plays a role too. How big were your colonies when you went into the winter, let's say for last season? You can make hand gestures like, grapefruit, baseball, tennis racket. 2. There was only 2 bees in there. So 2 deeps and a quilt box on each. But how big was the cluster, right? So that's what you want to look at when you're looking at your colony going into winter. How big is your cluster? So, is it that big? Is it how many frames of bees do you think we're going into it? Because you could have 2 deeps, but that might be too much room for the bees that are actually in it. Okay, 14 frames of bees. All right. He says there was lots of poop, lots of bee poop. That's not necessarily uncommon either in an overwinter, a colony through the winter. You're gonna see some poop inside the colony. So you made it to January and February this year. You wouldn't have to type if you had a microphone that worked.
February, a cold month this year in Michigan.
What'd you say, Jerry?
February, you guys had a cold blast this year?
February, we got like two days in February that were about 75 degrees. At least in southeastern Michigan, mid lower. And it was really nice weather, but then it went sub-zero. I think we were down to like -10 for a little while there. It was really, really cold. But cluster size is important. They've got to have enough bees to get through the winter. But really, if there are mites in there, and there are going to be mites in there, they've got to have enough bees, enough healthy bees to sustain attrition from the mites going into the winter as well.
And we have winters here. I was talking to another treatment-free beekeeper, not near as frigid as your winters, of course, but he overwintered too large of a cluster, and they ate through all his stores and end up starving. A substantial amount of bees still starve. So I know there's that kind of fine line for your area of a blend of bee size and honey stores.
Yeah, Becca, Bruce's suggestion is pretty decent as well. And it's a good suggestion, and a lot of beekeepers in Michigan often will go with a 2-inch. You can even get away with a 1.5 inch or maybe a 1 inch foam board, pink foam board. Place it on the top of the colony with your telescoping cover or whatever it is, your migratory cover you're using for the top. The insulation on the top should be sufficient, and they're going to work their way to the top no matter what. That's what all the bees will do. They go up to the top. Quilt boxes, it's a mixed bag. Some people live and die by them, and some don't think that they're worth the spit. And it might just add an extra space where moisture can build, really, or moisture can't evaporate out quick enough. And some people use cedar shavings or what's the shredded newspaper from the paper shredder, you name it, all kinds of concoctions.
I think another thing, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Another thing to do is learn to evaluate moisture. So this is how I view moisture. It's like people say, well, how much ventilation do I need? So instead of like taking someone's opinion and their climate and where they live, what I do is I check the bottom side of my inner cover, and I check it for moisture when it's cold out. So if there's no moisture there, then they have enough ventilation. If there's moisture there, then they need more ventilation. So I do it instead of like asking someone's opinion. I just do it by checking the actual part where moisture is going to accumulate in your colony, and that's usually on the bottom side of your inner cover above your bees. If anybody else has any input on that, I know Bruce likes going with really thick foam. I've done that also. I'm going to try something different this year. I'm going to try quilt boxes and under supering NUCS going into fall. And the reason I want to under super is because that's how bees build naturally, as they keep moving down, and I can give some upper ventilation in that. But if I keep my entrance at the bottom, then I think the bees will be in a more natural state to have their honey stores and their pollen stores where they leave them naturally instead of us over supering. I don't like to feed, and that's the other reason that I would like to try under supering and see how it works. Because if let's say you put a box on, and at the end of July, because it's still raining and you got dandelions and you have other things still blooming, and you're worried about them swarming, you want to give them space. Well, let's say they only use half of that box that's above them. Well, half a box above them is kind of not good, because it's not what they really need. They need that box to be completely full. Well, so to make it full, you could feed them for 2 months if you have a poor goldenrod flow. But if you don't want to feed, then it kind of leaves you in a tough spot, because it's not what's best for them. And it's kind of like not how they actually build their hives naturally. Because Sam Comfort talks about that in some of his talks, where he talks about his Wari hive design that he uses, and he undersupers, and it's kind of pretty, it works for him and the state of New York. So I'm going to see how it works. What do I got to lose?
Yeah, Bruce brings up another good point, and that's, I mean, it's one of the downsides of sugar black. They'll skip right over the honey stores. They'll go right into the sugar blacks, and then they don't necessarily recluster properly, or they, you know, break cluster and half of them are up there, and then the cold gets them. You know, it's a really tricky situation to be in, for sure. Some people, again, live or die by, you know, putting the sugar blacks on there, or using the mountain camp method. Adrian Quiney is up in upper Minnesota. Is it Minnesota or Wisconsin? I think it's Wisconsin. I can't remember. And, you know, he emphasizes feeding the snot out of the colonies till they reach a specific weight before going into the winter, because he's gauged how much weight they need to have to make it through the winter. At least for the size of colonies that he's wintering his bees in. And you know, I think it's 72 pounds. He puts his colony, makes sure that the colonies themselves weigh 72 pounds before they overwinter, and they typically make it because those are 72 pounds worth of bees, woodenware, and stores. And that's what he's averaged out to be sufficient for his colonies to make it in 5-frame over 5-frame NUCS. And he's got a higher than 80% survival rate, and he's not treating going into the winter. He's not treating coming out of the winter. And he's managed to do that. So that's the key. You know, the bees, the stock of the bees have to have enough resources in the colony going into winter for that particular colony. And that's where it really all comes down to, and why treatment-free beekeeping is important. I mean, there's 5 interventions for every question that we could come up with, and maybe 100 answers to that question. But realistically, if you're starting out with the philosophy and the principle to go toward expanding your apiary so that you can survive losses when you do have them, but also that you're able to breed from survivor stock, you're able to propagate the bees that you have from the survivors that you're having, you're acquiring survivors that don't require the treatments to get through the winters, then that's where you're going to find your success. And that goes back to the question we asked Jerry earlier. You know, at what point did he become okay with sustaining losses? And that, you know, even the hardest, most seasoned and chiseled treatment-free beekeepers amongst us don't necessarily enjoy losing bees, but have come to accept it and are okay with it, because there's more of a desire for a successful bee to be able to withstand all of these various things that nature throws at it. And that's far more worth it to have those bees that can handle those circumstances, for sure.
I don't know how many people run longs. I have some longs, and for some reason, my longs have a lot less issue with varroa than my verticals. I have an opinion on it, and I think my opinion on it, I don't know if it's accurate or not, but I can't think of another reason. And that is, bees in a long hive are always on the underside of the inner cover. So I use like a 3/8 high quality plywood with an inch foam on top that's glued to it and fastened. And those bees are always in a warm spot their whole life. They're never moving up and down in a cluster. So they're always warm. And makes me wonder if bees, when they're always warm and they're not, I don't think they need to densely cluster, because I have put temperature probes in my hives, and I'm not sure if it's in the cluster or very far away, but I've had hives all winter long not go below 89 degrees. So to me, a hive that can maintain that kind of temperature, if the bees have the ability to groom mites, I think they have an easier time grooming mites if they have to other things for survival than just stay warm. So if they can stay warm easily, then they can do other tasks, like, let's say, recognize grooming on other bees that need it. So I don't know if that's a valid theory or not, but that's the only thing I can think of. And I've had hives that overwintered in longs that are just unbelievably large and productive and can make 300 or 400 pounds of honey if you give them the space. I mean, that's how big they are. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on why a long hive I have a higher percentage of success over a vertical.
I would not have any kind of input to offer on that, that's for sure. That's just because I don't have any longs.
Well, I think another thing that could be fun too, I mean, beekeeping is supposed to be fun, and I think that's where we like to experiment. And if people have, I'm not sure how other people, what they have as far as equipment, but I have a table saw and a router table. I'm able to experiment, make equipment. I'm making some of my own homemade frames for a worry hive with just barbecue skewers and a couple scrap pieces of wood. And that's been a lot of fun. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that hive does, how it overwinters. It's just a 12-inch inside measurement, but it's going to be fun to see how they use that hive compared to a hive that's rectangular shape versus square, if it has a higher overwintering success. So I'm not sure how much other people enjoy doing woodworking equipment on building equipment. It's something that I get a lot of pleasure out of doing. It's just very creative. I think it's an excuse to try to get bees that you don't have the good genetics to get through winter. You know, you're trying everything you can without treating to get your bees through winter. And as each year goes by, you try to improve the quality of your genetics. You know, your losses are losses. They die. But you know, it's fun to have some really super strong colonies come through winter, and then they just bust out.
Here's the bee shed Becca and Mike have built for their bees. I shared with them that you have a gazebo, Jeff.
Right.
That's a doozy of a shed.
Wow.
That's an awful lot of protection. I think that Mike probably secretly built that for himself just in case he needed it later on. I mean, that's usually my motivation when I build things around the house, is just in case. But you can use it for other things, honey. I promise. I promise. Yeah, that looks good. Now I know that there's a place I could probably go if I need to hunker down for the night. Looks good. Looks good. Well, I hope this has been helpful for you guys, Becca and Mike. I saw that you asked to join the treatment-free group. We went ahead and approved you. Well, hopefully, you'll be able to find some good information there. But also look for the treatment-free, the National Treatment-Free Group. It's just called Treatment-Free Beekeepers. There's also tons of podcasts that are available there. There's members there who have been keeping bees treatment-free for billions and gajillions of years. We'll give you 1,000 different answers for every question that you ask. And, you know, the point is that none of them believe that it's necessary and, you know, to treat your bees for mites in order to have bees that can survive mites. And definitely look forward to having you on board. I do want everybody here and who's joining in later to keep in mind that we will have some additional learn and share talks scheduled, and we look to have some really great speakers, particularly talking about queen breeding, sustainability in your own apiary, being able to have the resources that are available to you so that you can have success without worrying about nuking your hives with chemicals. And not necessarily have to worry about losing colonies because you have enough bees to handle and sustain those losses. And that's the worst part. It's as somebody put it, you know, there's nothing worse than a quiet spring for a beekeeper. But looking forward to additional talks, and hopefully the PA Swarm King himself can shed some light on swarms for us, and you know how swarms help the beekeeper's apiary. You don't necessarily have to have a quiet spring because you're just waiting for swarms to start. And if you catch swarms, you don't got to buy bees. And you know, that's another aspect of treatment-free beekeeping. You don't have to spend money on bees because there's bees out there that you can catch and raise bees from. We are also looking at developing. Why do you need bees to die, Bruce? He's got too many bees. That's his problem. And we're looking to organize the Sustainable Beekeepers Guild of Michigan. You know, that's something that's on the horizon, currently in development in the background. More information will be available on that. Bruce says that the reason he needs bees to die is so he can have empty equipment for swarms that are coming in. Yep, that's probably a good problem to have. We're also going to add some hopefully additional queen breeding and nucleus exchange programs for treatment-free beekeepers from the Beekeeping Guild. And you know, the real point of the guild is to organize efficiently and to organize purposefully, so that there's something that's legitimate about having access to these resources, as opposed to just a hodgepodge connection or people with similar philosophies. You have a very purposeful regional attempt to develop you know, treatment-free stock in an area. And you know, if the more treatment-free beekeepers there are in a location, the more drones that are treatment-free are mating with queens that are treatment-free, the better propagation that stock will be. And you know, selection will eventually win out in the end, and you'll have bees that can handle Varroa. If you have any future learn and share topics or things that you're interested in learning, don't hesitate to send a message. So group administrators right now, or you know, myself, James Lee, my pseudonym on the page is Seeking a Kingdom. If you want to know the story behind that, that's a private message. Feel free to go ahead and send me one. I'll tell you. And then Jeff Wesolowski, who's currently here within the chat, he's always available if you need some assistance. You know, and then the final thing, you know, we want to see happen with not just the page, but also the Beekeepers Guild, is that we develop a mentor network for treatment-free beekeepers, and that people can come to a specific location and identify somebody in their region that they have access to, and that's willing to share with them information about treatment-free beekeeping and beekeeping in general. And with that, I really do appreciate everybody coming, and everybody who may join in here at a later date. Thanks for stopping by. Feel free to leave $1 in the glass on your way out. I promise I'll use it for something good. Becca and Mike, it was a pleasure to meet you guys. Jerry, thanks for sharing with us. And Bruce, of course, thanks for gracing us with your presence. We are very, very grateful, sir. Very grateful. All right, everyone, have a good evening and stay safe out there.
Take care now, everyone.